screen?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. So, good morning, good afternoon to everyone. Yeah, I'm Pablo Cayado, currently working as postdoc here at the Carlo Institute of Technology, working in the group of Professor Bernard Horsafel. Basically, here we are working in the preparation of thin films. In our part of the group, but yeah, I am part of a bigger group which is devoted to everything about superconducting technology, from the basic science to the real applications, and even inserting devices in the grid and so on. But yeah, as I said, my topic is the preparation of thin films, so more in the basic science. And in particular, my part of the group is dealing with the MOD, so we are preparing thin films by chemical methods, and in particular with chemical solution deposition. And this is the topic of my presentation today. I will explain you some of our more recent results about the preparation of such films. In particular, I will talk about our recent work about the preparation of gadolinium VCO thin films with preform, or what we call Insitu nanoparticles, which is, let's say, a novel technique in which we can prepare these nanocomposites with these preformed nanoparticles. So I will start with a very general introduction about why we are studying these nanocomposites and the recent developments, and then I will enter in the particularities of this presentation, which is about the pyrolysis and the importance that this step, as I will show you, has in the final property. So let me start with very general information that everybody of you know. We are working with REPCO compounds, which has this typical perovskite structure. And these REPCO compounds are nowadays very of interest of the community, because they are the base materials of the coated conductors, as you know, which are the evolution of the so-called first generation superconducting cables, which are this one with visco. In this case, we have these planar tapes, which are, as you know, which has several challenges to be solved in order to make them usable in applications. These coated conductors have been developed quite a lot in the last years, and nowadays we can find quite a lot of applications, of possible applications, as you can see here in this chart. However, the use is still not very, let's say, worldwide spread, because still the ratio cost performances is too high. So it's probably the most challenging topic for the researchers to be able to decrease this cost performances ratio, so decrease the cost of the preparation of the films while increasing the performances of the coated conductors. Of course, this is not easy, and here at my group, in my group, we are trying to, let's say, attack this problem by the two perspectives. So on one side, we use a technique that can decrease a lot the cost of the preparation of the films, which is the chemical solution deposition, and on the other hand, we are also studying how to increase the performances of the films, of the REPCO films, by preparing nanocomposites and improving their properties. So the first part, some basic knowledge about nanocomposites. Why we need nanocomposites? Yeah, as you know, the REPCO and all the high TS superconductors have have this mixed state in their phase diagram, and the presence of this mixed state is associated with the presence also of these vortex, which are these flux tubes that can move depending on with the magnetic field when they are in this mixed state, and this causes that the current that flows in the superconductor decreases quite a lot with temperature and also with magnetic field. So the way to prevent this movement and keep the properties high is to pin these vortices, and for this we need the defects that the Repco compounds has inside. So these defects, depending on the nature, can work on one way or another, but all of them can act as effective pinning centers. These are the type of defects that can appear naturally in the films or in the bulbs also. But in most of the cases, they are not enough to really pin effectively these vortices. So what we are doing is to create artificial pinning centers by introducing secondary phases inside, for example, or creating these defects but in an artificial way. So usually this is the types of defects that we can have inside, that we can create, let's say, depending on the size. So we have the 0D, like the vacancies or atomic disorder, for example. The 1D, that is commonly known as the nanocolumns, for example. Also the 2D defects, like the twin boundaries or the stacking faults, and then the 3D, which are the nanoparticles. These are the ones that in our group we are focusing, because we think that they have the advantage that they can have an isotropic effect, or it's not like in one specific direction, but they can have like a more isotropic effects all around the film. So in order to create or to prepare these nanocomposites, usually we can distinguish between two different techniques, or two different ways. The first one is associated to the in situ growth techniques. In these in situ growth techniques, we call them in situ growth techniques because in this type of techniques, we have a simultaneous deposition and growth process. So it's, for example, the PLD or the sputtering, where while you are depositing, the phase is already created. In this kind of techniques, you see, usually we obtain these self-aligned or self-organized defects with these typical, for example, these typical nanocolumns. Sorry. On the other hand, we have the exit to growth techniques. In this case, we have a sequential deposition and growth. So first we deposit the films, and then we grow them, and we achieve the Repco phase. Sorry. And in this case, the nanoparticles or the defects tends to, in particular the nanoparticles, tend to be randomly oriented. So there is no self-organized or self-arrangement of the defects. They are, let's say, homogeneously distributed in the film, in the matrix, and they tend to be randomly oriented. These have certain advantages while using this technique, because this can create several strain effects in the surroundings. So this is an interesting approach to create these nanocomposites. The CSD belongs to this second approach. It's an ex situ growth technique. Yeah, this is the CSD process that we are using. As I said, it's an ex situ growth technique. So first we deposit the film here in the spin coating, or well, by different techniques. We deposit the chemical precursor solution, and then we put this first gel that we have of the spin coating, and we submitted it to pyrolysis first to remove the organic content that is inside of the initial precursor solution, and then we have to do a second step, which is the growth, which we do it in order to get the Repco phase. This growth, as you can see here below, is has like two steps. First is the crystallization to achieve the phase, and second is the oxygenation to get the orthorhombic phase. So, because as you know, after crystallization we have the tetragonal, so we need the oxygen to convert it into orthorhombic. And this is the pyrolysis that we are doing. So pyrolysis is a low temperature step, only till 400 degrees, which is, as I said, for removed organic content. But not only this, but when we use CSD and we want to prepare the nanocomposites, we have also two options. First is the so-called the Insitu process. This is since the beginning of the use of the CSD. This was the so-called the conventional approach. In this case, we prepare the solution with the YBCO of REPCO precursors, and also we add the nanoparticle precursors. In this case, we have the nanoparticles are created spontaneously during the growth of the process. So they don't exist in the solution, but they are created spontaneously during the growth. In the other case, we have the novel ex situ approach, which is the main topic of this talk. In this case, it is quite recent, quite novel technique. In this case, we create first a colloidal solution of the preformed nanoparticles with a specific size and shape, and then we mix it with the YBCO or REPCO solution. Finally, we have like a colloidal solution of the YBCO REPCO solution plus the preformed nanoparticles. And in this case, the nanoparticles are already there, so they are just embedded in the matrix during the growth. The advantage of this process is that we have a precise control, or theoretically, of course, it's not so straightforward, but theoretically we have a precise control of the nanoparticle size, and we have a very precise control also of the internal reaction. So we have something that we cannot really control in the in situ approach, and this is the advantage of this process. So we decided to explore in detail this ex situ process, and for that, of course, we need to prepare the nanoparticles first, because we need to first create the colloidal solution. This is a work that we are doing in collaboration with our colleagues in Ghent University. And yeah, these nanoparticles are created by the heating and what the so-called heating up synthesis, just mixing the precursors, heating up in certain conditions, and then we can obtain this nice distribution of, and in this case, hafnium oxide nanoparticles with really small size and not agglomerated, as you can see here also in this chart. And then we can use these nanoparticles to mix it with our gadolinium solution, gadolinium PCO solution in this case, and then we can start to prepare the films. So when we start to work with this type of colloidal solutions, we observe certain problems, certain troubles that we try to solve, and I will explain you how we did it to solve the problems that they appear. So initially, our first idea was to say, okay, we have nice in situ films, gadolinium plus hafnium oxide plus barium hafniate films. They are working nice. So why don't we use the same conditions as we use for this in situ approach with this colloidal solution? So then we decided to start with this pyrolysis step, which is the conventional one. This is, as you see, we call it multi-step because it's quite complex and it has several steps because of different internal reactions that happen during the pyrolysis. And then we use the conventional growth. But here, as you can see, when we analyze the XRD, we observe that while during in the in situ approach, the conventional films, we have a nice film with only presence of the epitaxial peaks, so 00L peaks. When we use this combination of processes, we observe here a huge 103 peaks, which means that we have a lot of misoriented grains. So when we observe that, the first idea is to, okay, we have to modify a little bit the growth process, change temperature, change oxygen partial pressures, change water pressure, etc. We did a lot of experiments and we always observed the presence of 103, so we could not change or modify this kind of presence of misoriented grains. So then we thought about the last option, which is that maybe is the pyrolysis, which is doing something, which is creating an effect on these misoriented grains. And when we use this other pyrolysis profile, this called single step profile, which is much shorter and reaching the same temperature but much shorter, because we avoid these long intermediate steps. We observe that in this case, we could reduce a lot or even avoid totally the presence of this 103 peak. So there are no misoriented grains, or at least they are very reduced, while we observe also nice and intense 00L peaks. So this gave us a hint about the importance of this pyrolysis process, something that was never thought before. So in our previous thinking, the pyrolysis is always something established, something that is not harmful at all. But with these experiments, we realized that the pyrolysis is really doing something. But what is doing it? What is the pyrolysis doing? We try what I am showing here is what happens when we use this single-step process pyrolysis and we modify either the heating ramp or the final temperature. And you see that the JC and the press and the ratio of these misoriented grains calculated with this formula here, the ratio of the JC and the misoriented grains amount change with changing either the temperature or the heating ramp. So this means that by careful analysis or careful adjustment of these processing parameters, we are able to increase the JC or improve the performances of the films, and this increase of the JC seems to be correlated with a decrease of the amount of misoriented grains. So this is what we could conclude from these experiments. So what is the reason for this a huge amount of misoriented grains in certain conditions? This can be correlated very well with something that we discovered years ago in these two papers. That is that in certain conditions, the nanoparticles that they are already preformed, they tend to agglomerate or to sink and go to the interface. Then, during the growth, this layer of continuous particles, they react and they form a continuous layer of BZO in that case, and in this case BHO, because these nanoparticles, which are hafnium oxide, react with the barium and they form that a continuous layer. And then what happened that in the moment that the YBCO in that case, or GBCO in this case, wants to nucleate, instead of doing it in the LAO or the substrate, they do it on top of this layer, which has a large mismatch and leads to misoriented grains. So this was already proved in these two papers. You can see here that the zirconium signal is very intense in all the cases in the interface. So this is something that is happening, but it's something that we can modify by adjusting the pyrolysis, as I showed you before. This is exactly what I am showing here. We did some so-called XPS depth profiles which means that we are bombarding the films with ions, and then we are analyzing with XPS the emitted ions, atoms, and we see that changing, for example, the heating ramp, so modifying from 300 degrees per hour to 600 to 60 degrees per hour, or changing the temperature, increasing it from 300 to 500, we observe a change in the distribution of the hafnium signal in this case. We see that, for example, in this case, we see a tendency to agglomerate towards the interface, and also in this case, they tend to agglomerate toward the interface. While here in this middle sample, the signal is more or less stable, more or less the concentration is more or less homogeneous, which means that we have less tendency to go to the interface. Also here, you see that in these TM images, we have the confirmation what I show you here in the XPS. So at this in this 60 degrees per hour and this 500 degrees, we see a much more a much larger amount of nanoparticles in the interface, as you can see. So much larger than here in the middle sample, which means that the GVCO have to grow or to nucleate on top of this. So the amount of misoriented grains can be it's quite larger. So these so-called Insitu films with these Insitu nanoparticles show promising results. We have here, for example, an increase of the H star, which means that we can enlarge this single vortex pinning regime. However, this is, let's say, the first step of this process, and that still we need to optimize much more to reach the values and the performances of the in situ approach, as we also publish in this other paper, because in this case we have much larger values of JC and also better in-field performances. But this is a quite promising first step, so we need to still optimize, but we are quite happy with these results. And yeah, with this I came to the conclusions. Yeah, we are able to implement the exit approach with an alternative REPCO, because at the moment until now all the experiments with the Insitu were done with YVCO, which we tried for the first time with another REPCO. And yeah, as you can read here, modifying the pyrolysis conditions can create an impact in the nanoparticle distribution. So yeah, something to be attentive in the future when we want to optimize these films. So thank you very much, and that's all. Do you have any questions?
Thank you, Pablo, for a very clear talk. If anybody's got any question, there's a hands up button that you can get to at the bottom of the participant